the news? The Rochester Kwanzaa Coalition is excited to invite you to the annual celebration of Afrocentric culture, community, and family values. Kwanzaa, an African-American cultural holiday where all beliefs and religions are welcome, is a time for people of African descent to honor the past and recognize the good in their communities. It is also a time of reflection and to commit to continuing to strive for excellence in every area. Kwanzaa celebrations are happening December 22nd through the 31st, including a special Ujima evening affair on Saturday, December 15th.
Where's the right time to do a great thing? If you're waiting for that perfect moment, that perfect time, it's not going to happen. You know what you have to do? You have to create the perfect time and the perfect opportunity and the perfect situation.
10-minute break.
So a lot of people become comfortable.
20.
They stop growing. They stop wanting anything. They become satisfied. People getting ready to go to jobs that they don't like. Jobs that are making them sick. You see, when you're not pursuing your goal, you are literally committing spiritual suicide. When you have some goal out here that you're stretching for and reaching for that takes you out of your comfort zone, you'll find out some talents and abilities you have that you didn't know you have. When the messenger of misery visits you, what are you going to do? What will keep you in the game?
Hey, welcome to Rising Up Recovery on 100.9 FM. I'm your host, Jake Bishop, and co-host Big Daddy Danny. How you doing, man?
How's everyone doing? I'm doing all right.
Good. Today we're joined by Assemblyman Harry Bronson, and it's an honor to have you join us today.
Glad to be with you.
You look sharp.
Well, thank you. I dressed up just for the
real
show.
good on here, too.
You know, suit and tie.
We got everybody on our Rising Up Recovery page on the live, and we really appreciate your reaching out too. I know it's been a busy couple months for you,
It
and
has.
we're trying to get in touch, and it's nice when we be able to have you in the studio.
Well, I'm glad to be here and to talk to the two of you and have your listeners participate as well.
So Harry, you are an attorney and former member of the Monterey Legislature before you became Assemblyman. And what's the biggest difference you've seen between the time you became Assemblyman and now with the opioid crisis over 10 years?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's really interesting because I actually have a degree in public justice, which is a criminal justice background, and it really worked in relationship to alternatives to incarceration. And for the longest period of time, not only here in New York State with the Rockefeller drug laws, but through the entire country, we really looked at drug addiction as a crime.
Mm.
And, you know, the opioid crisis has, as tragic as it is, really moved us as a state and as a country to look at addiction not as a crime, not as a moral failure, but as a disease or a condition that we needed to address medically and with counseling. And so I think the biggest change for me is to really that diametrical change and attitude toward addiction and substance abuse, which I think is a real positive thing.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things we talked about was race. We compared to it. Danny and I have seen, I mean, just from being in the court system ourselves.
Well, yeah. I mean, we brought up multiple times about the discrepancies within the court system, how maybe African individuals, Latino community are treated differently than the white community. And you personally have experienced that and lived through it. You know, what are some personal experiences you've had with that, where you've seen discrepancies in charges or jail time possibly, as opposed to community service, right?
Yeah, your listeners may or may not know, but we talk amongst ourselves, the Democrat majority in the Assembly. We have conferences. We call them conferences. You get up and you have an opportunity to share your thoughts and ideas with your colleagues so that we can move forward in a unified way on policy. And my colleagues, Assembly members of color, repeatedly stood up, and they just wanted to make sure we understood that with the opioid crisis really involving a lot more white people than other addictions had, at least in the public perception, only in the public perception, I should point out. But they said, when it was When it was black men and Latino men, then we put them in prison. We put them in jail. But now we're not. So, you know, we have to acknowledge that. We have to, I think, factor that into where we go from here. But I do think it's really a positive step that we're starting to address this as a addiction, and it's not a crime, and we really need to help people work through this addiction versus putting them behind bars.
What do you think that comes from with having the discrepancy between white and black families? I think part of it is because we had Mayor Rob Corby from Pittsburgh join us, and he said because people have the money to go over there at the time, and they don't want the information out there that somebody's addicted.
Mhm.
So they're willing to do everything they can to provide support, but sometimes that support is keeping people in the dark.
Yeah. I think part of it is that. I think it's the wealth and income inequality that exists in our society. But I also think it is the systemic racism that we have in our society that has set up a system that really prevented people who don't have access to money. We just reformed the bail system, right? So that with the cash bail, the majority of individuals who are in our county jails are people who cannot afford $500 worth of bail money. And so what that has translated into is that we have incarcerated people of lower financial means, and far too often, given the systemic racism in our system, that means people of color.
Is there anything being done for those people who are incarcerated right now, who have drug addiction, to be rehabilitated?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because some law enforcement are opposing the removal of cash bail and making the argument that we need to keep that because we get people in the county jail system and we have substance abuse programs in county jail systems. I think it's great that we have substance abuse programs in county jail systems, but that's not where we should be providing the counseling and the services and the treatment for people who are addicted. We should be doing that out in the community and giving them that support versus incarcerating them to do it.
Does that start in schools? Where does that start? From the beginning, the root, from the community? I remember I was talking to somebody at the DARE program with law enforcement officers, and some of that were saying that it didn't actually help.
Well,
Yeah.
it's actually statistics say that, and yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a cultural thing. It's a law enforcement attitude type thing where, somehow we're going to be safer if we put people behind bars, and that's just not the case. And it's not the right response to, certainly when we're talking about substance use and addiction, that's not how we should be responding to it. We should be responding to it by funding real programs with treatment, funding programs, medication-assisted programs, treatment, the MAP programs, and making sure that people have access to those medications that help them with the craving, help them to deal with the withdrawal symptoms as they appear, and things of that nature.
Yeah. Well, that's a fantastic point. I mean, the way I look at it, I mean, that's something that I personally dealt with firsthand, in my personal experience with addiction and stuff like that, even recently. But as far as the jail system goes, I look at it like, are you going to be, first off, what are the statistics behind the programs within jails? Are they truly helping people? What's the ratio of people getting out of jail that are going right back to using? And all those things. I don't know if there's been enough research done to show if these programs are actually helping.
Yeah, I don't know the numbers, but I do know this, that a lot of the experts in the field point out that, you get the treatment and you go through withdrawal, then you get incarcerated. Maybe you can stay clean if the drugs aren't in the prison system, but we know they are. But even if you are able to stay clean, if you don't have the ongoing counseling and treatment, and then you're released, you go back into the community, and all of a sudden, because you haven't dealt with the underlying addictive issues that you have, so chemically you may be clean, but you haven't dealt with the addictive piece of it because there hasn't been counseling in the prison system. You get back out in the community and you get right back into
I'm
it.
glad you brought that up. I think a lot of people say, can you abstaining from the drug that's recovery. You know, it's a lot more than that too. And we want to talk about relapses today, because one of the things that I've noticed is the alternatives. Not a lot of people even know what it is. Like NAAA, I always say that's kind of a place where people just get thrown in, like, oh, just you put them in there. It's like a daycare for addicts to see if it will fix them up. But some of the alternatives that Danny and I looked at, we're actually going to check out tonight. So if anyone's listening, it's over on Winton Road, the First Unitarian Church, and it's 7:30 to
7:30 to 8:30. It's called SOS, Save Ourselves. It's a non-religious program, and honestly, I'm not really sure what it's all about, but we're gonna go check it out, find out. And, I mean, listen, I mean, you're talking about relapse prevention, right? And buying into the community. I mean, me personally, and this isn't easy to say on the radio, but close to about 5 days ago, I had a personal relapse, right? Where, I didn't think these were going well. I was a part of FLACRA. I was going through, my own, sessions, with counselors in the program and all that. And in my head, I came up with this idea that, this isn't helping me. This isn't beneficial to me in any way, shape, or form. And, I didn't do myself justice by leaving the program and then not seeking other alternatives or other things that may be better for me, right? And that caused me personally to dive down and put myself in a position to use it. And it's not good. I talked with Jake and we spoke a little bit about how can we use this to help people benefit the recovery community, right? Because I'm not doing myself justice by hiding in a hole or hiding in a corner and saying, no, I'm good, I'm great, things are great. It's not true. Every person dealing with addiction deals with this. So what's the best way to do it is, hey, let's go out, let's see what's out there in the community, and let's talk to people about what they're doing. How is it helping us? Maybe someone's in the same position as me, and maybe is looking for those alternatives, right? And we thought that was a really good thing to do.
Yeah, we thought it was good to talk about relapse, we can hear it too. So, you have an understanding of what the addicts go through and what it's like for people in the recovery community trying to make it work, even professionally. Yeah. I think it's kind of hard sometimes because people think it's only junkies in the street walking by, or where is that place where they're having the La Marqueta? In Clinton. Mm-hmm. No, it's right over in Brighton. It's over in Penfield. Yeah. It's some of the areas that you talked about. I'm seeing you quoted about saying that we should be helping out. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so help me out with understanding this. I actually, you just shared a personal story. I'll share a personal story, and it's with my brother, and it actually, I have a lot of alcoholism in my family. And my brother, a year older than me, is going through a difficult time, and he's fine with me sharing this. So, but he had the same scenario. He got clean, was clean for almost a year, and then had a relapse. He reached out to some of his folks that were helping him, other folks who had been in recovery for a long time, but also reached out to family. But for him, the hardest part was reaching out to family because he felt like he was going to be judged. Mm-hmm. He was going to, that somehow that it was going to let them, that he let us down and that he was going to be judged. And so, what I and some of my siblings and his children, said was, we understand that this is difficult, and we're there to help you. So how does that work? I'm here to learn from you guys as well.
I'll say the first part, I think, is that reaching out and taking that time to say, I made a mistake, or I have some problem that I need to talk about, and having that phone call, because Danny has contacted me before, we've talked about it. I've called him too, saying, hey, listen, there's a little temptation going on. It's over the holidays. Mm-hmm. I'm not feeling so hot. Yeah. But just knowing that you can talk to somebody, and then afterwards, having that community around, that's the best part about Rising Recovery. It's like having no shame about being able to say, this is what I did, this is how I want to progress. And I think you've made the first step, Bill.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a prevalent thing in the recovery community, right? And all too often people are too ashamed or too scared to come out and talk about, hey, I screwed up, because they're afraid of that being judged, right? Me, you talked about family, right? I don't have the best family. I don't. They care about me, but they don't understand the problems and the underlying factors that cause and give people that fire of addiction, right? You know, I don't live in necessarily the best environment for someone in active recovery to succeed, right? But that's you know the majority of the recovery community. You know, based on our life choices, our environments that we have growing up, we don't put ourselves in good positions, right? But yeah, I mean, family is great if it's a good thing, but not everybody's family is a good outlet to help you, right?
Yeah, you have to have people who are supportive around you and to the extent possible, be non-judgmental. That's
Right.
kind of what we were talking about right in the beginning, and how the opioid crisis has really changed a lot of attitudes about what addiction is. And instead of it just being viewed as a crime or some moral shortcomings, I think more and more people are understanding that you know, addiction is a condition that we have to address with counseling and with treatment. And like you said too, it's not just the chemical piece, it's the underlying, you know, what is the addictive behavior that is exhibiting itself by overusing drugs or alcohol.
Yeah, now kind of off topic here, but what do we think about the opioid epidemic in general? Is this a change of demeanor, a change of mindset based on the medical industry kind of causing it, right? Overprescribing opioids to the public, and you know, is this why we've changed our mind? Because we're like, you know, maybe it's not their fault. Maybe it's what we're doing that's caused this.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more cynical about it. I think that it really is because the face of addiction has changed in the public's eye. I think it's always been there, but the housewife who happens to be a white female who's addicted and starts drinking martinis at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and continues until she goes to sleep at night. You know, that was always hidden. It wasn't talked about outside of the immediate family. And the opioid crisis, because an awful lot of people who were prescribed pain medications ultimately became addicted. And so the face of it changed, and unfortunately I think there's some racism that is underlying that. Now we're saying that you know, that it's not a crime, it's not a moral shortcoming, it's an addictive behavior that needs to be treated with counseling and the chemical piece, of course. But so the policy shift, the attitude shift is a positive thing, but I think it's based in you know, racism and the way we saw drug use prior to that. Like you said, it's, you know, the addicts that are out on the streets on North Clinton.
That's right.
Which you know, I'll share with you. I actually went there for Find Your Path, and we actually toured the area, and I was there with some peer counselors. It was a very sad. I mean, it was very sad to see that, knowing though that that's only one piece of the addiction community. But we had a young woman who was pregnant and was using, had come in, and you know, was kind of at rock bottom and really wanted to get help. And it was one of the learning experiences for me then was that window of opportunity. And they made some phone calls to get her into treatment. According to the peer counselors who were there, she said, well, I have to go get my stuff that I'm out on the street someplace. I have to go get my stuff. And, you know, they had shared, she was probably retracting from wanting to get clean at that point and go get your stuff, especially when they offered to drive her. And she didn't want to. She said, oh, I'll be back. And they said, you know, we don't force people. They want to, you know, they have to want to really get into treatment. We encourage them as much as we can, but we can't force them. So she left without getting connected with treatment. And their opinion at the time was she's not coming back. You know, she has decided she's not ready for it for whatever reason. We did get my office got a phone call. They called Jen in my office and said she did come back the following week.
No
And
kidding.
they got her in treatment, but they said that's unusual. That usually doesn't happen. So it ended up being a positive story, but you know, that was a real eye opener for me. And when you translate that into policy decisions that I'm responsible to make, and the barriers that exist in both Medicaid and certainly under commercial insurance coverage, where there has to be pre-authorization for the medications to help deal with the craving and help deal with the withdrawal symptoms. The pre-authorization can take 3 to 5 days, and not having that immediately accessible at the primary care physician's office, that can create a scenario where there's a quick relapse because there's not a treatment for the withdrawals, and there's not medication administered to reduce the cravings. So we have to change that, and we have some bills at the state level to remove pre-authorization, so that those medications can be prescribed immediately.
That's funny because on Twitter, somebody had mentioned a quote from you saying one of the consequences of death was the overprescribing of prescription medicine.
Yeah.
And you said, there's options, and now you just laid it out for everybody.
Yeah.
So anybody listening, you answered that question really well.
Okay, great, thank you.
I think we're about to go to a quick break here, and I just want to give a shout out to Tony Gingello. Wish you were here. Please bring back the sun, Tony. We'll be back to Harry Bronson. Fantastic. Yeah, it's interesting that you went out there. I went with the Hope Dealers, and I had a lot of thoughts running through my head when I was out there, because part of it was thinking about how the city and what it was probably like in my grandparents' day down over in Clinton Avenue. They grew up on Fifth Street, and then seeing people who were wrapping their arms right after we gave them some sandwiches and gave them a couple coats. I'm like, that's the guy I just saw. Why didn't they just ask for help when we were there? They wouldn't want it.
Did you grow up in the city?
No, I didn't even grow up in this area. I grew up in a small town called Windsor, New York, outside of Binghamton.
Okay.
Grew up in a very rural area, 200-acre farm. No water, no running water or plumbing in my house. We heated with a wood burning stove. I have 11 brothers and sisters. Huge family. And an identical twin brother named Larry. So, so yeah,
So the Three Stooges.
yeah, the Three Stooges. But I've lived here in Rochester since '91. I moved here in '91 and made it my home.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I love Rochester. Although we have a lot of problems, but I still love it.
Yeah, I know. I lived in St. Louis for a while, and I kept thinking, like, man, the epidemic here, and I come back to Rochester, and it's not so bad.
Yeah.
It's okay. But Hope Dealers, are there any other groups that you've been on with, or you've got in touch with?
Recovery Coach Services and Training with Lori, and she's the one that actually educated me about peer counseling and the need to have that in the hospitals and the emergency rooms and things like that right after an overdose. So I guess Highland and Rochester General Emergency Rooms are starting pilot programs in that area. So I don't know if they've launched them yet, but I know it's in the works.
So what does that mean exactly?
So that
Obviously, it's a preemptive, thing that they're doing to test out.
the pilot is a test thing to see if it really has an impact on can we get somebody in the emergency room and we deal with the overdose, how can we immediately get them into treatment? And so having the peer counselors there is a way, because there'll be people who have walked what they have walked. So I can hook you up with Lori. She can talk to you more about it.
That'd be wonderful.
Yeah. And that's one of the things we talked about is being released easily from hospitals and going right back out into the community and overdosing immediately after.
Well, and that is because the
The drug goes to zero, right?
Yeah, it goes to zero. So, and we can talk about this. I sponsored Narcan training with Trillium Health.
Oh,
So we did
beautiful.
that, so that was pretty cool.
Song was that? You ever see the show Barry on HBO? Love that one.
Yeah.
You didn't see it?
No, what?
You didn't like
Barry?
it?
Yeah, I love that show.
Oh, okay, I love the show too.
It's an awesome show.
Yeah, that was like that.
Really?
Yeah.
No, it's one of my favorite shows, actually. I'm not even kidding. I actually never brought it up to you.
Oh boy. All right. Let's go live anymore. Ooh. Thank you.
I love when he plays radio voice. Remember first season?
Yeah.
Last one.
No, don't tell me. I didn't see it.
You never seen it? How many of these are 4 episodes? I'm sorry.
My girlfriend does it all the time. She did it with the Bills game. Oh, they lost. We're back at 100.9 WXIR, Rising Up Recovery with Assemblyman Harry Bronson. Hey, thanks for having you in the studio here.
Glad to be here.
So, over the break, we were talking. Sounds like we're at the Rochester International Airport right now.
We have hurricane force winds.
I think that got everybody's attention. If they weren't listening, then
So I have no idea what that was, to be honest.
Over the break, we were talking a little bit about the pilot programs we're involved in. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so as a lot of listeners know, with an overdose, you get to the emergency room, they take care of that from a medical standpoint, and then the key is getting that individual into treatment as soon as possible, and hopefully directly right out of the emergency room itself. And so an organization, Recovery Coach Services and Training, they train peer counselors, folks who are either in recovery themselves or possibly folks who are family members of folks who are in recovery. And so the pilot programs in the emergency rooms locally, I don't know if they've been launched yet, but I know it was in the works to actually get these peer counselors in the emergency room, so when there's an overdose, then they can work with the individual as soon as they're ready, and hopefully make the transition smoothly into community-based treatment.
Oh, great. Yeah, we need that. 'Cause I almost every story I've heard, people waking up in the hospital, what happened? And 45 minutes later, they're right back out there.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Right back out there, and their ability, if they were to use immediately, that ability, their threshold is at a lower level, and so an actual overdose with death is more likely right after that.
And to be exact, I mean, the drug substance will go down to nil, nothing, right? So, yeah, it's a big point, and I believe, I don't know this for sure, but opioids is one of the hardest drugs for withdrawal, if I'm mistaken, the effects of it. So I don't think I love the pilot program because I don't think hospitals have been doing it justice. Seeing that, they have to be going through withdrawal symptoms immediately, right? So what does a hospital do releasing these people? I don't think it makes any sense, and I've been an advocate of that since I started doing this, actually.
Yeah, it's a continuity of programs and treatment, right? So the emergency room, all they deal with is the overdose and the medical piece of it. So if we can get folks into long-term treatment immediately, then the rate of success is going to be much greater.
Now, what do we do if somebody doesn't want that? What do we do if somebody doesn't want to go to treatment? I mean, you deal with an ultimatum there, right? Do we force somebody? Do we give them the option, the choice to go back out and ruin their lives again? I mean, what do we do?
Yeah, we can go back to the law enforcement idea. That's why they want to put them in jail, because then they can force them, as part of their jail sentence, they actually have to go to counseling and treatment. Whether it's successful, I mean, as most people know, if you're going to change addictive behavior or just habitual behavior, the first step is having a desire to make that change. Mm-hmm. And so forcing people, you don't have that desire yet, so that's going to be a huge barrier to success.
So is it a double-edged sword, though? I mean, what do you think? I mean, in your moral view, do we force somebody or do we not?
In my moral view, I don't think we can force people into treatment.
Yeah.
And, I think they have. I mean, I think you encourage them as much as possible. And folks and that's why peer counselors are so important, because they can talk to them, and they walked what these folks are walking through right now. So they have more credibility than, just a physician saying you should do this. And so that I would err on the side of that encouragement from people who have credibility with the individual.
So my own personal opinion would be this: if somebody goes into a hospital, they do these pilot programs, right? All of a sudden, they're dealing with the withdrawal symptoms. That's the worst time you could approach somebody, right?
Yeah.
So this person's dealing with all these different things, maybe sweating profusely. They have increased heart rates, pain, shakes, all that. You're dealing with this, and you're gonna come to them and be like, so this is what we want to do. We want you to continue to feel this way, right? And you're not going to be allowed to go back. I mean, in that position, that person's kind of like, screw you, right? So maybe come up with like an actual set standard for how we treat each drug individually, and not treat addiction as a whole, because each drug's different, right? Once you come up with that standard, what you would need to do is put somebody in a short-term program, get their mind right, and then really get them in with the peer advocates at that point, and have them talk to them, see if it is something that they can be persuaded to do. Because at that initial stage, it's the worst time you can talk to them.
Yeah, and that may be the whole process. I may not fully understand it, but and I think a component to that is what we had talked about earlier with the policy change that we have to make, and that is making it available, the medication assisted treatments, because part of that is dealing with the withdrawal symptoms, right? To make that available immediately instead of having pre-authorization for it.
Sure.
And thank you for the Narcon training support. We appreciate that.
Yeah, so I sponsored a Narcon training. I think it was last year. We went through Trillium Health, who does a lot of really good work. And I know they're one of the prescribers. I can't think of the medication that relieves the craving. What's it called? You know what? I have it in my notes here.
It's a shot that
Suboxone.
Yeah.
Suboxone. So Trillium is an authorized provider. It's free, by the way, at Trillium. You can walk into the pharmacy and get it. But anyway, and I do a lot of work with Trillium. And so we sponsored a Narcon training, and Trillium did the training. I just sponsored it. But I took the training myself. I have my own kit. And we had expected, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 people. We had over 100 people show up to that training. Trillium had to send out some of their staff and go get more, the free kits you get at the end of the training, and get more of it. But the training was just phenomenal. I learned so much in doing that, and you learn how to identify someone's going into an overdose. The idea that once you revive them with a Narcan, you're the worst person in the world because you just got rid of their high. And so, those just simple things like that. But it really, it's invaluable. Anybody that, I think everybody should take it, actually. First responders, we're encouraging training at the state level for first responders. We're funding to make sure that the Narcan kits are available. And I just encourage everybody to do it, because you never know if you're going to be in that situation.
I would say Narcan training is definitely a necessity. When we talk about Suboxone and promoting, injection sites, that's another, contradicting thing in itself, right? So,
how do we get people comfortable for that, Danny? Like we talked about this every single time, getting the sites, and people don't want that kind of crowd.
They don't want an image, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the town of Brighton, glorified Brighton. Do you think they're gonna have an injection center next to Trader Joe's? No, it doesn't make any sense. But the way I look at it is this. Well, number one, I think that we should have them. I think that they should be heavily monitored. And, oftentimes you find these people that go to these injection sites don't go to them continuously. Or if they miss a session, they go back out and they're like, oh my God. And sometimes it can make it worse. Because Suboxone's a drug in itself and causes withdrawal in itself, right? And then you are causing another addiction by using this. There's also actually, I should have wrote this down, a shot that people can be given where they actually, after given this shot, it's a one-time thing, you cannot feel the effects of any drug that you do. So if you drink alcohol, no matter how much you drink, you can't get drunk. If you do cocaine, no matter how much you snort, you can't get high. And it's a real thing. But it's also very dangerous, right? Because, somebody who takes that, all of a sudden they go to the drug and they can't feel high, they're going to overdose like that because they're not getting the effects.
Yeah,
But it's out
right.
there. And in extreme circumstances, maybe that's something that should be looked at.
Injection sites then.
Well, that's a very controversial
It is.
approach. I know we have a number of folks in the assembly that are promoting the idea and trying to educate the conference about it. The chair of our alcohol and substance abuse committee, she's been doing a really good job of trying to get people to understand the benefits of having injection sites, as well as the benefit of needle exchange programs, because of the HIV and other illnesses that you can get when you share needles. So those are things that are on the horizon, and we haven't really taken a position on it with the majority conference in the assembly.
Can I ask what your position is on it?
Yeah, I'm still evaluating it.
Okay.
I'm trying to figure out the real benefits, without encouraging additional drug use, but recognizing that the path to not using, that recovery path varies depending on the type of drug, right?
Mhm.
And it varies depending on the individual, and so in some regards, that's not inconsistent with the desire to have medications that deal with the symptoms and medications that deal with the craving more readily available. So if you are doing the safe injections, will that allow us then to move, to a step of using methadone for a short period of time and then ultimately getting off a use altogether? And to some degree, for me, that's medically driven, and it's also therapy driven, and I just don't know where I stand on it at this point from a standpoint of having the state promote it one way or the other.
That's a fair response. And
Is there consensus a little bit that you're hearing from people though with their opinions? on
I'm
it?
hearing people that are promoting it and trying to educate others about it. Yeah.
Well, I also want to let you know that a lot of the members from the LGBTQ community wanted to say thank you.
Okay.
I'll say hi today. Too,
Excellent.
if you're listening.
Yeah, I've been a gay advocate for a very long time. I'm one of the old men in our community. But we've seen great turnaround in my lifetime. I never thought we'd have marriage equality, and we do. We now have the Gender Expression Non-Discrimination Act that we just passed into law this year. We just passed into law this year the banning of conversion therapy, which is really, the legalization of having therapists tell you to hate who you are, whether you're a gay person or a bi person or a trans person or a non-binary person. And so we banned that in the state of New York. Therapists can no longer administer those kind of conversion therapies. So, we've come a long way, and we still have a long way to go, however.
definitely.
Mom said you were courageous, so she was really excited about that.
Oh.
Yeah, but I think for me, we know so many people in the community, in the recovery community, that deal with the issue. It's kind of like a community within that recovery. People having that trauma, or I think I was also supposed to ask you about some sort of defense, the panic.
Yeah, the gay trans panic defense.
Yeah.
A lot of people did not understand that there has developed through case law here in New York as well as in other places across the country that if someone started to sexually be engaged with another person and found out that they were gay or found out that they were a trans person and then assaulted and or murdered them, there was a panic defense that said the emotional response was so drastic that it was temporary insanity, and they could have a defense against that assault or that murder. We this year banned that in New York State.
Thank God.
Yeah,
Ridiculous.
yeah, people did.
It's adequate.
Folks, most people didn't even realize that it existed.
I honestly had no idea what that was.
Yeah.
No, it brought to my attention, like, not even sure if this is a real one that's going to be submitted to me, but okay, I gotta ask.
Yeah, so it's now banned in New York State, which is great.
So can I ask how many states that has been addressed and how many states that has been banned in?
I
Do you have the
don't,
answer to that?
I don't know how many. I know that it is a minority of states that have banned it. But then on the conversion therapy, there have been a number of states that have banned conversion therapy, but it's still a minority of the states that have banned that as well.
I want to do a shout out to Rock Recovery Fitness too today over on Dewey Avenue. You guys doing a great job. We had a great party over New Year's Eve, and we wish you the best. We're going to take a quick break. Thanks for joining. Yeah, I'm looking, I'm like, well, I don't have time to look up to see if that was an actual thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Somebody just sent that in.
Yeah, our message.
Right now?
Wow. That's pretty amazing.
I feel like we're on the ones and twos today, Danny. We got some good songs.
Is that?
On the ones and twos today. We got some good
I don't
songs.
like the first one. This one.
You like the first one. You know, next time I'm gonna ask everybody who comes on what song they want to hear.
We're not
That would be a good idea.
I'm gonna get bad at that.
Yeah, especially like if you get somebody really wouldn't want to hear.
So when we go back on,
Yeah.
if you'd ask me about mental health practitioners, and I just had 3 bills vetoed by the governor, which is important in the area of substance abuse. The bills relate to direct reimbursement of what's called mental health practitioners and social workers, many of whom are involved in substance abuse counseling. And a couple of the bills dealt with reimbursement through the Medicaid system. And one of the bills dealt with requiring commercial insurance companies to cover that direct reimbursement. The reason is under our base, it's very complicated, under our base insurance coverage that we developed, they're called exchanges, under the Affordable Care Act, the Federal Affordable Care Act, we only identified psychologists and psychiatrists to get direct reimbursement required under commercial insurance. So that excludes mental health practitioners, social workers, and all those folks who do an awful lot of the real treatment and the counseling in the area of substance abuse and mental health. So anyway, the governor just vetoed those bills because of the Medicaid problem we have at the state level. We're short $6.2 billion.
Wow.
Slight short. So huge problem. But anyway, we really need to expand those reimbursements so that these other, and they can only do what's in what's called their scope of practice. So what they're licensed to do therapy-wise and counseling-wise, this doesn't change that at all. But it would authorize reimbursement so that people who are living in low-income households could get reimbursed through Medicaid, and others can have their insurance company cover.
Okay, right. Yeah, we try to hit on mental health sometimes because I don't think people understand how important it is to it. It's tied in.
Yeah.
Even with homelessness still.
Yeah.
We're having somebody come on talking about how there's so many veterans who are homeless or have a mental health disorder.
So RIT just received a $1.4 million federal grant to address opioid use and homelessness. So I don't know what they're going to do with that grant,
Incredible.
but they just got that grant. So if you want to find out more about it, we can get you connected with Debbie Sundardi. She's the governmental relations person.
Yeah.
Make sure we do that. And we'll give them this.
This is really true. Yeah.
And we'll give this.
Just the 80s, 70s. This music video is a pageant from the 70s. I'm not sure what the relation is here, but
So who decides the music? You guys?
yeah, sometimes, mostly Jake, because Jake doesn't like my music, but we play rap sometimes too.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of fun to play around with it.
Mhm.
Danny, it's all you now. Hey, we're back at 100.9 WXIR, Rising Recovery, Danny Hefner and Jake Bishop, and we have Assemblyman Harry Bronson in studio. How you doing?
I'm doing well.
Good.
It's been great being with you guys this afternoon.
A lot of fun. We had a little mob talk today. We had a little talk about the opioid crisis today. We hit all the points. But over the break, we're talking a little bit about mental health. That was really interesting what was going on there.
Yeah, so mental health and counseling in general is very important when we talk about substance abuse and really dealing with the addictive behavior that underlies the abuse and helping people to have a successful recovery. So I have several bills that deal with authorizing direct reimbursement through the Medicaid program, as well as direct reimbursement through commercial insurance medical carriers, and direct reimbursement for folks who provide counseling and therapy that are not psychologists or psychiatrists. These would be, they're defined as mental health practitioners. They include marriage and family therapists, psychoanalysts, it includes social workers and a number of other disciplines. So what these bills would do is for their scope of practice, so that's what they're licensed to do, the therapy and counseling they're licensed to do. In those arenas, they would be able to bill Medicaid directly. So people who are on Medicaid would have additional access to mental health services. And another bill would require medical insurance companies in their insurance policies to provide for reimbursement of these mental health practitioners. The benefit in this area is that it provides additional access to therapists and counselors, so folks who have substance abuse would be able to access them. Unfortunately, the governor in his wisdom chose to veto each of these bills this year. And he basically associated it to, in particular in the Medicaid area, the cost of having that reimbursement provided. So I would encourage your listeners, I'm going to push these bills again as we enter the session in 2020 this year. I'm going to push it. I'm hopeful we get it passed in the Assembly and in the Senate, but we're also going to push it to have these be piece of the budget. And so the budget that we pass, the statewide budget, we deal with that from January to April 1st. So there's going to be a huge push on this. So if folks can call the governor's office and say we need this in the budget, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, we need your help, guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a necessity, right? But now here's what I'll say. I mean, you had brought up a point too of there being a $6.2 billion deficit, right, with it?
Yeah,
So how do we overcome that?
Yeah. So in the Medicaid arena, quite frankly, the state's been kicking the can down the road for a number of years. And so we have a deficit in our Medicaid arena of $6.2 billion. That's the largest budget deficit we've faced since 2011. In 2011, we had a $10 billion deficit. The response is going to be, do we increase revenues through taxes and fees, and or do we make cuts in expenses? So I think it needs to be a combination of both. I think we need to increase revenues, but I also think that we need to make cuts, but I think we have to be very smart about those cuts and the priority. And so I don't think that the cuts need to be on the backs of Medicaid. Unfortunately, even though that's where the deficit has developed, the governor at the end of 2019 put in an agency order to reduce Medicaid payments by 1% to our hospitals. That includes our local hospitals. And that's only going to save, I think it was upwards around $600 million, which is a lot of money, but it's not $6 billion, right? It's not walking around money. So I think we need to maybe prioritize, and we should be providing our folks who are on Medicaid, we need to be providing them the medical and the mental health services they deserve. And I think the cuts really can come in some of the economic development money that we're investing in other areas and we should find those cuts and not do it in the social services area.
What's coming up for legalizing marijuana? I know you're in support of medical marijuana, in some cases for substance abuse.
Yeah, I supported medical marijuana, and my own life experience. I had a friend who was living with me shortly after I moved here to Rochester, died of ovarian cancer at the age of 31, and her mom and dad used to go and buy marijuana underground so that she could have some of her symptoms alleviated the last few years of her life. So I strongly supported medical marijuana. I also strongly support the legalization of marijuana. I come to that decision because I find it very hard to distinguish that from the use of alcohol, but also that it would be better to legalize it, regulate it, and hopefully eliminate. I mean, we now have marijuana on the street that's laced with fentanyl, a deadly drug. If we regulated it, we could curb that to a large degree. If we legalized it and taxed it, we could help communities that have been most adversely impacted by the criminalization of marijuana, and that would be Black communities, Latino communities, and we could help those communities with the money that we receive through taxation. We could help those communities, invest in those communities. I'm a strong advocate of also providing entrepreneurial services. So people who are now selling underground, let's get them above ground and get them into the business. That's legitimate, and that they're providing a safe product, a legitimate product. Now, all that being said, those are the good social aspects of it. I'm not encouraging people to smoke marijuana. I'm not suggesting
I want
people
to let you know
should
that
do that.
we're not smoking right now for those of you who are listening.
But I do think it's very hard to distinguish marijuana from alcohol use, and we have alcohol use legalized, and we saw the difficulties of the prohibition years with alcohol. We're seeing the same thing with the prohibition of marijuana, and we need to turn that around.
You sound very identical to me in how I approach that situation. I actually support it wholeheartedly for those same reasons. Now, Jake has brought up some valid points prior, though, of areas like Colorado and stuff like that, and the effects that the legalization has had on those states. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, there's like the honeymoon phase where it's that big boom, but some of it with the retail end has not been as substantial and been able to catch up with how much it was for the taxation, which was a big boom with the billions.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things about that. So the taxation is very tricky. You can't overtax it, because if you do, then it encourages the underground market, because it becomes too expensive to buy legitimate marijuana. So you buy the cheaper stuff underground. So that's a part of the taxation. The other piece of the taxation is you have to evaluate it long term. There is clearly going to be a huge bump upwards in the beginning, because everybody's going to come in, and certainly if we have some surrounding states, some have already passed it, and one has, and there's others that are considering it. So whoever gets in the market first is going to have the bigger boom, because you're going to get people crossing the state border. But you have to analyze that over long term and realize that there is going to be a dip downward in the retail aspect of it.
Sure, getting over that, because I think what in California has done within those, was it 8 years or something, they had the retail jump up. I think New York could do it better, to be honest.
Yeah.
I feel like there's that entrepreneurial spirit. It's been around. I have a plan. This comes up. I like the fact that people ask about the black market. Well, it's going to be there for as long as, even afterwards.
Yeah.
People are going to buy land. They're going to be smart about it with their investments.
Yeah, the key is, can we cut? And so having a taxation level that allows it to still be affordable. The consumers are going to want to buy a more reliable product, so that's really important. And the last part, which is really what Massachusetts is currently doing, it was kind of a second stab after their implementation, but they have actually put in funding for entrepreneurial training, just like we do with high tech and other areas of people coming out of RIT and U of R.
That's clever.
This will help so that people who are currently selling are going to be able to have legitimate businesses and sell in the open market.
One thing I want to bring up in regards to that too is, I mean, a little rhetorical question: why has Walmart been so successful? Because they offer the lowest prices, right? Now, the problem here is, yeah, we can go ahead and lower tax rates and lower prices on a product, but the dealer is going to, right? So what's going to make those people go to those?
Yeah, it's a
But-
combination of a couple of things. People would rather not buy illegal products, generally speaking. Even the users right now, most of them say, yeah, we'd rather be able to buy it on the open market. And two, if you're showing that the product is more safe and that you know what you're actually getting, you're not risking. Three, and there's some studies being done by a professor at University of Rochester that will actually be able to let us know what the HTC content is, so you know what kind of high you're going to get with which product. So all of those kind of things give you a superior product that you can buy. So if you and what I had mentioned earlier, making sure on the taxation that you keep it so it's competitive. So that's a tricky formula. Colorado didn't do it very well, but we're working on trying to figure that out.
See, and just really quick, I wanted to say, I mean, I'm not saying I disagree, but I think increasing the criminality of illegal marijuana would be the way to go about that too, increasing the risk, as opposed to just a slap on the wrist like it currently is. But I know Jake wants to address this.
Yeah, we got a couple minutes left. I want to thank you, Assemblyman Bronson, for joining us today. And one of the things we like to do at the end of the show is ask our guests if there's anybody listening, hopefully there is, who might be suffering from addiction right now. Is there anything you'd like to say to them?
Yeah, I think that the most important, let me back up and just say, my philosophy of life is no matter who you are, what you look like, where you come from, who you love, how you identify, we all have dignity. And with that, we deserve full equality, justice, and an opportunity to succeed. So although in those categories, people who are using and abusing and possibly addicted, you're not specifically named, but I want to say I see you. I see you. I see your dignity. I respect you for who you are. And with that, I'm there to be supportive from a policymaking standpoint or otherwise, Narcan training or whatever. I'm there to say that you are a person of value, and your addiction doesn't change that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate those words. And want to thank you for joining us on 100.9 WXIR. Look forward to hearing you guys next week. Thank you so much.
That was great. I enjoyed it.
Very nice.
That was really chill.
I wanted, yeah, as far as what you were saying, Danny, were you saying make the criminal stuff worse?
Hold on.